Morning, everyone online. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you to all those who've come and joined us today in the room. Nice to see so many people here. And thank you to those who've joined us online. Welcome to ABL's Maritime Market Briefing for January 2026, when we're going to take a look back last year and I look forward to what to expect in 2026. Obviously, those of you who've been following us for a while will know this is usually done by my colleague Paul Hill, but unfortunately he couldn't make it this year, so I've been dropped right in it, but it's a pleasure to be here. This webinar and the briefing is accredited by the Chartered Insurance Institute, and delegates can claim up to 1 CPD hour for your participation. We'll therefore be keeping a record of those of you in the room today and those of you logging on online. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you sign in with the team on the desk outside after the briefing in order to keep our records up to date, and we can follow up with the accreditation if required. Just a quick reminder, today we will be ending the webinar portion of the briefing after the technical presentation, and the marine casualty case reports will only be given in person in the Lloyd's Library. We are, of course, happy to discuss them post-briefing if you want to get in touch. Technical presenter today, I'm doing it, as I said, because Paul Hill won't. For those who don't know me, I'm the Global Managing Director for Maritime here at ABL. I'm based here in London, but I regularly travel around our other regions, keeping in touch with clients and my colleagues. I'm an ex-seafarer and chief engineer, and I'm delighted to be back doing this in Paul's absence. And to read this month's case reports, we have Oliver again. Oliver's a naval architect based here in London at ABL and part of our graduate programme. Thanks again for joining us, Ollie. Please note the usual caveats apply, Chatham House rules apply, and please remember that the information contained in today's presentations and any opinions or comments expressed are those of the presenters and not necessarily those of ABL. At the end of the briefing, can we please ask everyone to take a few minutes out of their day to complete the online survey? This is very crucial for us to keep our CPD accreditation, and of course allows us to keep our topics relevant and to discuss with you what you guys want to hear from us. Don't worry if you miss it, we'll also send out an email after the briefing. Before I kick off properly, just a bit of news from ABL's maritime teams around the world. I'm very pleased to announce we've got some management changes on the go. Sean Murphy's taking over the role of Maritime MD for North America, looking after Canada, USA and Panama. And Adam Eager is taking the helm of our maritime team in Singapore. Do reach out to them on LinkedIn or through myself or Steve if you want to get any more information. Many of our colleagues are available 24/7, and many of the colleagues are also ex-seafarers. So if you want to look into the Neptune Declaration, I know we've mentioned it before, it's very close to our hearts, and ABL is a signatory, and it helps with seafarer standards globally. So again, for the CPD accreditation, we're going to quickly go through the learning objectives for today. We're going to have a look at the significant shipping events and casualties from 2025, look at the trends of marine casualties in 2025, what to expect coming up in 2026, and any new regulations, challenges and risks we might see on the horizon. We'll go over these again at the end of the presentation. So looking back at 2025, obviously still very much in the press, the expansion of Houthi attacks in the start of the year. Throughout 2025, the Houthi rebels' attacks persisted in the Red Sea, prompting global shipping routes to change or continue to be changed via the Cape of Good Hope, increasing time and cost to many passengers. There was a ceasefire in May, but even after this ceasefire, the Houthis reserved the right to strike Israeli-linked vessels, maintaining high insurance premiums and costs. And in July, obviously a few months after the ceasefire, the Houthis sank 2 commercial vessels with deadly attacks, tragically claiming the lives of more seafarers. Obviously, this has operational and economic ripple effects. Rerouting around the Cape adds about 10 to 14 days to a voyage, shrinking effective container capacity by around 9 to 10%, and inflating freight rates amid tighter supply. The drop in traffic and revenue obviously has a significant impact in the Suez Canal and the Egyptian government. Transits have dropped now by 75% since the beginning of 2023, and the revenue has plummeted by tens of billions since the start of 2024. So, as a tentative resumption, while Suez traffic showed early signs of recovery in the latter part of last year, based on the Gaza ceasefires and the Houthi ceasefires, owners certainly remain cautious and operational conditions remain unstable. The Black Sea, still an issue, of course. Drone attacks and vessel attacks, some mine issues as well, still ongoing through 2025. There was a diplomatic effort for maritime safety, and in March of 2025, the US brokered discussions with Russia and the Ukraine to secure an agreement preserving safe commercial navigation in the Black Sea, aimed at supporting ongoing grain and fertilizer exports. This has largely been successful, but there have obviously been some issues. And despite this pact, drone and naval attacks did continue, and vessels en route to Russia were struck by drones, prompting elevated insurance costs and conditions in the area. The ongoing sanctions as a result of what's going on in the Ukraine have also had an impact on the dark fleet, which I'll come on to a little bit later. There's a few issues to deal with the dark fleet. Many older ships are being saved from scrapping or recycling. These vessels are obviously reached a certain age and are of a poor condition and perhaps had suffered from lack of maintenance. Where previously they would be recycled, the cash buying market for recycling has dried up significantly because these vessels are no longer on the market for recycling. They're being brought into the Black Fleet. It's estimated that in 2025, the dark fleet, rose significantly to about 12,000 vessels globally, including an astonishing, in my eyes, 19% of the world's tanker fleet. Fueled by geopolitical tensions and sanctions, and its vessels used increasingly sophisticated methods such as AIS spoofing, shell companies, ship-to-ship transfers offshore, flag state manipulations to avoid enforcement. Although recent seizures and robust policy actions and insurance transparency efforts show growing counterattack on this, the dark fleet activity remains a persistent maritime security and obviously a very potential serious environmental threat. Collisions and groundings and pollution incidents have occurred during 2025 involving dark fleet vessels. And of course, towards the end of 2025 and more in the start of 2026, we've seen the US seizure of sanctioned tankers off Venezuela. We've also seen what has been termed, or I've seen termed as zombie ships, vessels that have the identities of vessels that have been recycled or scrapped being recycled for vessels which are still in operation in the dark fleet. Seafarers, again, close to our hearts here at ABL, but they're still very much living and working in danger on the front line. The Galaxy Leader crew was finally released in January 2025 after an astonishing 430 days in captivity. It must have been awful for them, obviously, and their families, but obviously everybody's very pleased that they've finally been released. Fatigue during 2025, or the statistics we've been able to get our hands on, that unfortunately, I would have thought in this day and age, all of these things would be going in the right direction, but they appear to still be going in the wrong direction. Seafarer fatigue issues due to workload, environment, shift patterns, and some regulatory overload and constraint was recorded a 25% increase on the previous year. And unfortunately, also a 25% increase in seafarer fatalities since the pre-COVID years. 83% increase in seafarer illness, much of which, about 80% of the seafarer illness, is linked to stress. Worryingly, and very sadly, suicide rates among crews surpass fatalities. A 25% increase in seafarer deaths and suicides has been noted over 2025. And fatigue simply intensifies these stress-related illnesses. Some of this is impacted by, or some of this, is being relieved by IMO and ILO regulation changes. There's been some amendments on shore leaves, repatriation, anti-harassment and complaints procedures. But other regulations which burden the ship's crew with more work have had the opposite effect. And a term, again, which I've only really come to know during 2025 with regards to seafarers is a techno-stress. It's where the seafarers are not being trained to use some of the equipment and regulatory frameworks that they've been faced with, and it's causing them stress and it's having an impact on their mental health. The ILO did agree to raise the global minimum wage for seafarers by 6%. I guess not bad in the current climate. but obviously the wage limits we're talking about were started significantly low. Unfortunately, 30% of seafarers faced a delay in payment, and almost 10% report being not paid at all. The deepening crew change crisis continues, even lingering on after the pandemic, with about 400,000 seafarers stranded on board and an equal number unable to join ships. Some have been at sea for 17 months now, well beyond the MLC limits of 11 months and some days. We've also seen a worrying 150% rise in 2025 over 2024 on entire crew and vessel abandonment by their owners. That was a bit of a depressing slide. I do apologise. So moving on, other geopolitical events we've seen impacting the shipping and the marine insurance industry. China ran something called Justice Mission 2025, not a DC movie, but a very large military exercise around Taiwan in late December, including live fire zones and naval encirclements and enforcement. Over 130 aircraft sorties were flown in Taiwan's airspace, and the Chinese Navy practiced blockade rehearsals. These drills led to immediate disruptions. Port schedules had to be changed and altered. Insurance terms had to be altered and tightened, and charter contracts became more cautious. And we saw a drop in freight rate and cargo vessel miles travelled in the region. Then, of course, back in February, the US started to ramp up tariffs to 20%, eventually reaching over 125%, with China mirroring similar escalations. While some trade was redirected, including container traffic, bulk, and oil through Southeast Asia and Mexico, long-haul trans-Pacific shipping reduced noticeably, affecting shipping volumes and port operations in the regions. Whilst Panama Canal had recovered from the severe rainfall shortages seen in 2024, in early 2025, it also got itself embroiled in some geopolitical issues and halted its participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative, which opened the door for US investments to acquire some port operations linked to Chinese interests. This move, alongside some increasing more stringent audits and legal challenges concerning sanctions and the Chinese-linked port concessions, signalled a bit of a broader power play aimed at maintaining influence over this critical maritime choke point. So global shipping in 2025 was not really just about moving goods like it should be. It became a direct barometer of geopolitical tension and strategic rivalry around the world. Moving on to alternative fuels progress in 2025. Obviously, this is a hot topic. Lots of people talk about this. I think it's a very important topic. I myself, again, the opinion of the presenter, not that of ABL, has some skepticism around some of the options we have moving forward. I think what's important for many of us to keep an eye on and to understand at the moment is by far more than 90-something% of all vessels globally trading are still conventional fuel, either heavy oil or intermediate oil or marine diesel or burning vessels. So that's really where our operational and day-to-day focus needs to remain. We've seen some instances of regulatory bodies and some other industry bodies kind of taking their eye off what needs to be done now to keep going, to keep improving what we've already got, as opposed to sinking all of the initiatives into what may be coming. That said, LNG's mainstream foothold certainly stayed true in 2025, and LNG kept the largest share of alternative fuel orders, particularly in container shipping. And now we've got quite a steep rise. 38% of the global order book, despite a market slowdown, is now alternative fuels based. Methanol had a rapid scale up from orders to delivered ships. Deliveries of methanol fueled vessels surged in 2025 to 59 ships. So I say surge, but obviously when we compare it to the global fleet, it's still quite a small number, but it doubled the active fleet. While Singapore, Rotterdam and Antwerp and some others advanced their methanol bunkering frameworks and opened licensings that will start in 2026 to allow these to come into operation. Ammonia and hydrogen progressed, but it remains quite niche, and a handful of ammonia orders appeared, including an ammonia bunker vessel and a small number of hydrogen orders, signalling an early infrastructure alignment, but not yet widespread adoption. As far as infrastructure goes, LNG is far ahead, and methanol is moving from pilot studies to programs. Clarkson tallied LNG bunkering ports available at 222 globally, with 62 more planned, and increasing shore power or cold eyeing facilities around the world as well. While methanol bunkering moved into structure licensing, as I mentioned earlier, and there are some approvals now in some key EU ports for the same. AI in shipping. This obviously we've been talking about for a few years as well. The pace of change has ramped up, but the direction of where it's going remains relatively similar to our discussions about this last year. We've seen some improvements in operational optimization, where AI can analyze data to optimize shipping routes, reducing fuel use and emissions, obviously for cost savings and environmental compliance. Predictive maintenance with using AI to monitor machinery in real time to predict failures and minimizing downtime and lowering repair costs is becoming more effective. There is obviously some resistance to relying on it entirely as opposed to time-based maintenance. There's a resistance to allow components to remain in service past the slightly more conservative time-based limits, just because the AI monitors it and says it's still okay to go. We've seen some advancements in enhanced safety and security. AI supports navigation, hazard detection, emergency response, and cybersecurity to improve maritime safety. Automated cargo management as well, especially with complex cargo vessels, automating loading and unloading, increasing accuracy and reducing human error and any bending forces on the vessel in cargo handling. So 2025 data is not available yet on total losses, but it still is trending very much downwards, and a significant drop from over 10 years ago seems to be still heading in that direction. This data obviously it comes from the insurance industry. This is from Allianz Commercial, and only of course involves insured losses, and we have seen, obviously back to the dark fleet issues, some losses which are not insured. So I'm not sure how those will impact these numbers if we were to look at those side by side. And in 2025, we have seen some dark fleet losses as well. So it'll be interesting when we get the full data a bit later in the year. The cost of claims has been rising for some time, as we all know. I don't want to get anyone too excited, but I'm cautiously optimistic that the post-COVID inflationary pressures we saw rise so rapidly, sometimes 140% year on year in the immediate post-COVID years, seems to be abating a bit. And we are seeing unit costs come down globally, and yard space freeing up for repairs. What we have seen in 2025, and again, this will become a bit clearer once we've collated all of the information for 2025, which we haven't yet, being only January, is that fires are dominating major claims in 2025, both on vessels and in shipyards. So we'll now have a quick look at the top 5 cases that ABL has reported to you during 2025. Just a bit of a caveat, these are only based on those that have made it into the case reports for 2025, as Ollie will explain later. There may be others that are similar of a higher cost that we've had to hold back for sensitive or political reasons. But we'll be adding the numbers of those to our databases later in the year. So the 5th most expensive at 7.1 million was a grounding of a bulk carrier, followed by a bulk carrier engine room flooding, rising up to 8.4 million. Cargo hold fire, 8.45 million, another bulk carrier. Generator engine damage, we've got 8.5 million. We've got a new one of those, which isn't in the details yet, which is probably going to be around 13 million. And a tanker and a chemical tanker, a tanker collision, which we'll be talking about later, which is Stena Immaculate, of course. We've also got a potential another cruise ship damage, an azimuthing pod failure that could, we hope not, but could be significantly eye-watering if the whole thing needs replacing at somewhere around $30 million. So what can we expect in 2026? Obviously, the start of this year has, we've seen a lot of aggressive geopolitical acts affecting shipping, especially with the US and now, of course, UK involvement in the seizure of dark fleet vessels carrying sanctioned oils and cargoes. There was one at the end of last year. There's been a few more this year, and one of them now, I understand, is arrived in the UK or off the UK. USA is doing some saber rattling in Denmark for Denmark with regards Greenland, which is obviously also an island nation, so that will have impact on shipping routes and shipping costs. Panama Canal issues as well. There's been some rumours that there might be an attempt to take control of the Panama Canal. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Obviously, there's a common thread in those three, but I won't get too much into what that is for fear of disappearing on my way home. We are seeing the continued development and approval of SMRs, of small modular reactors, for the nuclear power of maritime assets moving forward. Again, not ABL's opinion, but it's my personal favourite as a solution based on the technologies we currently have as an industry and as a race, I guess, and a species. And we're seeing, I think, a much more serious stance on the development and approval of regulations coming forward. It won't be 2026, but the continued development of them moving through 2026, I think, is an important part of what we'll be seeing. Autonomous vessels and their regulation development continues with pace. Regulations came in 2025, which are not compulsory yet until 2032. But so we'll see as 2026 goes on what the uptake on those is with the various state authorities. Again, we mentioned earlier that seafarers can suffer from fatigue from regulatory issues, regulatory changes, increase in regulation. 2026 doesn't look too bad. There are a few important ones coming on. There's SETDW code amendments for mandatory training of seafarers on the detection and prevention of harassment, bullying, violence, and sexual assault, which, of course, I think can only be a good thing. There's going to be a tightening of minimum qualification standards and competence requirements for the fishing industry, for any of those involved in that part of the market, which traditionally hasn't been quite as strict as commercial shipping. There's amendments to SOLAS with regards to lost container reporting. So now the immediate reporting by masters in the event of containers lost at sea, which obviously will help with navigational safety. There's going to be some improvements in lifting appliances and anchor winch regulations, which should hopefully avoid some of the incidents we've been seeing over the years. Electronic inclinometers must be fitted on all new container ships and bulk carriers over 3,000 tonnes, again to improve safety at sea. There's some fire safety regulations. New built ships must comply with upgraded ro-ro and vehicle deck protection standards. And there's going to be constraint and banning of a chemical, PFOS, which it was traditionally for a long time used in firefighting foam, but has now been proven to be quite bad for humans. So that's now going to be banned in firefighting materials, which can only be a good thing. There's a Polar Code expansion coming up with the extended application for Polar Code safety and environmental protection standards to non-SOLAS vessels which are operating in polar waters. And there's going to be some revised amendments for the carriage of dangerous goods, grain shipments, and operations of gas-fueled ships. So obviously, all in all, the intention of this is to make things safer. We just need to ensure it's adopted properly by owners and their seafarers are able to implement them. Any questions on that part of the presentation? Anything online? No? No, that's it, is it? Okay, well, I've got to put these up again because we're at the end of the our broadcasted webinar. Just a final recap on what we've been through. You can see it up there on the screen. So this concludes this month's ABL Market Briefing for those of you online. The next one will be on Thursday, the 13th of February. So hopefully we'll be able to see you guys online, or of course you can come down in person as well. So we're just going to stop sharing our online portion now. Thank you very much.